Hey there, welcome to episode 95 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at 11:45 p.m., Wednesday, September 17, 2025. We publish this audio program on Thursdays, so for once in a while, we're getting a little jump on things this late night Wednesday. By the way, it's 11:45 p.m. Pacific time here in Vegas. Trying to be more attentive to the time zone for my vast global audience, so you always know what time it is. The FFS Talk audio program is essentially intended to be a conversation, debate, argument, whatever the case may be, about a particular topic. So someday we might have a guest on. I prefer to think of these audio essays, monologues for the time being, as the beginnings of future conversations or arguments. Today, the seed will be planted for personal supply chains. This is a topic that's kind of interesting and will probably become more interesting. Things are certainly changing. If you have ever looked into Bretton Woods, the post-World War II development of a global economy, global supply chains, all that, it's kind of interesting. It's been the way the world has sort of worked for, let's call it 75 years. I'm sure I'll mention that again. But things are changing. Things will, and they probably have to, so that's fine. So personal supply chains are something we should probably become more aware of if we are not already. By the way, if this is the first time you're listening to FFS Talk, if you don't know what FFS means, I'll give you a hint. It is a abbreviation for an expression that is typically Irish. You will certainly hear Irish people say it out loud. If you don't know what FFS means, you need to hang out with more Irish people. Not a bad thing. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, and there should be more places now, hopefully you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a summary, which is two short sentences. One is shorter than the other. And a couple of links. There will be the normal links. I am trying to tune the links a little bit, try to cut it down to about 2. There are still 4 program link, audio program links, the usual. And then there's 1 Wikipedia link for today's episode on personal supply chains. So let's get started so we can get finished. We'll try to finish before it turns into Friday. No, I'm going to guess this episode will be something like 30 minutes, maybe, give or take. It won't be an hour. That'll be nice. You can probably hear my voice is enjoying the weather variety here in Vegas. I'll apologize for that now. That's all I can say about that. Today's summary, if we can get started. Anyone who never heard of a supply chain probably did during the infamous pandemic lockdowns. I should say never before. Who had never before. There we go. Okay, take 2. Anyone who had never before heard of a supply chain probably did during the infamous pandemic lockdowns, when global supply chains were suddenly a part of the problem rather than the amazing global economy. That is, they were not a part of the amazing global economy anymore. They were causing trouble. What about your own supply chains? The links for today's episode, as I mentioned, the usual, now called the profile page linking everything, is my classic, as in I've had it for at least 5 years. I think it's been about 5 years, might be 6. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. That's DANHUGO. That's a free-form profile page. It has links to all of my audio programs, various projects. It has website links, Spotify for creators links, profile links, and YouTube links for my various audio programs. It has GitHub links for my various projects. It has affiliate links for some of my favorite coffee beans and some other things I actually purchase and use. You're under no obligation to spend any money. That's all for free. You can if you want. You can use the affiliate links. You can actually throw some money in the tip jar. Any proceeds go towards purchase of coffee or coffee accessories. That's what makes all of this go. The Buy Me an Update audio program happens to be located at the same site, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts. It publishes every Monday morning, usually. It's a rundown on the previous week's audio programs, topics, and titles and any news and announcements for the upcoming, the week or the near future. That link will probably go away. By the way, you can also find the Buy Me an Update audio program, not only on its initial exclusive home, buymeacoffee.com, but it can be also found via Spotify for creators, and it has a YouTube channel. It's available at the danhugo.com website. How can you go wrong? Same goes for Coffee Solo, ko-fi.com/danhugo/posts. That is my anything goes, no particular schedule, no particular limitations on topics. It's an audio program. It's published whenever, like I said. Used to be published exclusively on ko-fi.com. Now it is published there first and then available Spotify for Creators profile page, YouTube channel, homepage, danhugo.com. Guess what? All those are linked from the profile page linking everything. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo. Okay, enough of that. Finally, there is a ffstalk.com website. I'll warn you now, as I'm recording this, everything that has its own website that I am working on is still very much a work in progress. The data is there, the look, the aesthetic, not as much, but we'll see. It's high on my to-do list. It has been for over a week. Pardon me, the supply chain Wikipedia page, the link is available right there. Wikipedia.org/wiki/supply_chain, CHAIN. More people should understand the complexity, or, well, to the casual person, the complexity, the complication of supply chains. It's kind of interesting. A lot of things have a supply chain. Software has a supply chain. They can be compromised. It's becoming a real thing, and it's probably something we all need to understand with more in more detail. I think because it's unlikely that they will go away. I was almost going to, and I guess I will, make the analogy that supply chains are sort of like understanding how a car works. Like, a car is a really complex system. Most people don't open the hood, so to speak, the boot, the bonnet, whatever. They don't look at how the engine functions. They don't completely understand how a manual transmission works, much less an automatic transmission. And in the era of electric cars, of EVs, electric vehicles, some of those things are going away, but they're being replaced by possibly more complicated systems. Why does my electric vehicle blow up if it catches on fire? Well, because lithium-ion batteries are extremely flammable. But so is gasoline, except that there's been decades of fuel tank development to try to reduce the likelihood of an explosion. Not as much time spent on making battery technology and EVs more resistant to such things. So anyway, the complexity of your vehicle is not something we all delve into, but it can come in handy to understand something like that more in more detail. So supply chains are kind of in that category of thing we kind of depend on, and we probably should know more about. And that is the crux of today's episode. By the way, I'm treating this as sort of the beginning, the first episode in what could be several that will take a little bit more focused look at different things. So today is different components, different elements of how supply chains work. I am not a logistics person. I am not a supply chain master. However, if you've ever been involved in the production, the manufacturing of things, which I have, then I've had brushes with supply chain issues. As a software developer, there are software supply chains, like I said, and the point of today's episode, personal supply chains, guess what? We all have personal supply chains to deal with. Unfortunately, we usually don't think of it that way, but we could. So yeah, let's get started before my clock says 11:54 p.m. Pacific time. So we're not going to make it before Thursday. But let's get started anyway. Supply chains. A supply chain is, in general, is a representation of sources and pathways of raw materials, components, and subassemblies. These latter would have their own more detailed supply chains, of course, most likely secret or not as obvious. They can be quite involved with a more complicated final product, or finished goods often made up of several subassemblies with their own supply chains, as I mentioned. which can make for a manufacturing nightmare if these chains get twisted or break, which they did, and which they occasionally do. They did during the pandemic. There were some issues with various supply chains and whatnot. And even today, geopolitics and other such things are wreaking havoc on global trade, especially when it comes to global supply chains and manufacturing. It'll all come out in the wash. Maybe. The idea comes down to basic accounting. If the thing I want to make has 10 parts, and if I can find 10 sources for these 10 parts, they may be, who knows where they are, such that my cost to obtain with shipping those parts is the best price, the best cost technically, and all 10 parts can arrive at a place with the best labor and infrastructure costs to build. In fact, let me change that. Best price becomes best cost. Oop. Okay. So it costs me the least amount to obtain all these things, ship them to some place where they will be assembled. There will be labor to do, the people doing the work. There will be a factory or some place where this will all take place. And then they have to be shipped to their destination or destinations, hopefully more than one. I can maximize profits and my shareholders will be happy if I can reduce the labor and the infrastructure costs, reduce the cost to buy and ship the equipment or components, I should say, and then end up with a final finished good, a finished product that I can sell. And so if I can maximize that product, profit on that product, everybody wins, right? Wouldn't that be nice? Over the long term, so let's say it's been about 75 years, it's maybe a little bit longer, but maybe a little, we'll call it 75. Spreading sources and labor and infrastructure over multiple places in different countries brings economic engagement and likely economic benefit to many places. Now, we're not going to comment today, but it would be worth a discussion to look at what it really means to pay pennies to people in some cultures because the cost of living is allegedly so much lower than it is in, well, let's say the standard of living is lower than in the United States, for example. There are all sorts of issues that sometimes we may not want to ponder, but some of these supply chains, even though value is brought to a country, whether that value is spread all the way down to the people doing the labor, doing the work, maybe that's something that we can talk about in another episode. So we're just getting started. The economic engagement, probably good. Economic benefit, sometimes dubious, sometimes not. Production by street, even at midnight. The economic benefit may or may not reach down into the individual people doing the work. But there's also a substantial risk with things like piracy, weather, equipment failures, geopolitical strife, wars, global pandemics, and maybe a few other possibilities. Oh, those. Yeah. So things can start to get complicated, but there's also complexity. So what about complication versus complexity? These two terms are related, but not quite the same. To the casual consumer like you and me, global supply chains seem complex because we really have no idea what is going on and could probably only guess the first layer of interconnection. However, there is an entire infrastructure of people and tools and methods in place to monitor and maintain the supply chain infrastructure. So there are two infrastructures, the people that are kind of steering it and monitoring it and making sure it all works and balancing the books and so on. And then there's the actual infrastructure of moving the things around and assembling them and then shipping them here and there and so on. So it makes a complication of many levels, but ultimately accounted for. So I'm probably going to say this again, I think, but complication is intricate, seems difficult, but ultimately has a path to completion. You can say that a puzzle is complicated, even if it has 1 million pieces. Every time you put a piece into the puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, you are approaching completion, and over time you will see that it's coming together. And oh, look at this! Okay, it's a picture of milk spilled on a floor. All those white pieces were such a pain, but you finish the puzzle. Bam, complicated. Complex means that you don't necessarily know if you're making progress. You don't know exactly what the steps are to approach some sort of completion, or you don't even know for sure if you're completed. So complexity can be really tricky, and it's possible, the way I'm describing this, for a complicated system that has professionals and professional people, tools, methods, access to data, and so on. They have all the things necessary to make the complication of global supply chains something that they can actually account for. And you need to account for those things so that you know if you're making money. Shareholders are really into that. But it's to the casual person, these are complex. Like, oh, I don't even have what? My iPhone has how many pieces? Like 5,000 different steps of moving things here and there. And we've heard about one item to make a car might pass from one country to another, 3 times or 4 times or whatever. So why? Why is that? They're building subassemblies, of course. And I don't understand all this. It's complex, but it's complicated. But everybody knows they can account for every step and every penny. It's all on the books. When there are people and systems in place to manage supply chains, they can be observed and even diagrammed as part of a larger accounting and logistics process or processes. Any level of interconnection and interdependence can be visited and understood. That's what people do. That's their job. So this is part of the process overall. Part of the reason it all works is that people can actually unroll these complicated multi-step, sometimes thousands of steps of moving things and assembling them and moving the subassembly to another place so it can be put into another subassembly and so on and so on and so on. I know I don't have anyone looking after my supply chains though. So I myself know what I can find out with a little bit of effort. I see headlines that warn of supply chain issues, inflation and so on. But really, do we have any idea where all of our essentials come from and how they arrive in our cupboards, in our homes, in our pockets? Maybe. So let us say for business of any size, supply chains are a complication that is understood and has at least one person, likely more, tasked with keeping track of these details and accounting for smooth operation and cost fluctuations and whatnot. Everything's accounted for. This has worked, give or take, for all of the caveats for with all the caveats for the circumstances anticipated and otherwise, the weather and the geopolitics and the pandemics and whatnot. This has worked, mostly. Personal supply chains, where we obtain our essentials and sundries, somehow, we may not always know exactly how, and also where and how, like when they're disrupted. Well, we don't know, but we get them eventually, and this seems to work. But we usually have no idea the complexity from our perspective that makes them work in at least some cases. Do you really know exactly how water reaches your sink or your bathtub? How electricity lights your home or powers your computers, your TVs, your internets? Do people watch TV anymore? I don't think so. Sometimes these are somewhat mysterious. Some people actually take the time. I've been to water treatment plants, and I've more so when I lived in Silicon Valley, but the intricate water recovery system of Southern Nevada is a thing that is the subject of study and research, sustainability. So it's actually kind of interesting if you're into that, but it works. All these things. I can walk to the grocery store and get all of my groceries that I want and need, maybe in some other order, and I'm really not sure where they come from. They're here when I need them. I give them my money. I get my stuff. I walk back home. Do I know exactly where everything comes from and how it came to be? Absolutely not. Could I find out? Maybe. So it works until it doesn't, whatever the particular supply chain pathway is, and we wait until it works again. We've all had a power failure. We've all had some water shut off for a broken pipe or something. As long as it comes back on. Sometimes I will be impatient. Once you have some idea of these complexities, right, complicated to the line person that's fixing the electric delivery, the delivery of electricity to residential areas, the people that are fixing the pipes and making sure the water flows and it's not turbid, all these things are happening. Once you know that they are happening and that there are people that actually pay attention to these things, you can go on your merry way and not worry about it, right? Or maybe you should kind of worry about it. You should kind of know how it works. There was always a saying with a car, manual transmission is not so common anymore, but there would always be, oh, I don't want to learn how to drive. We used to call it stick, the gear shifter stick. I don't want to learn how to drive stick. I'll just drive an automatic. But what if someday you only have access to a car with a manual transmission, a standard transmission, stick? What if you only have that and you need to go for help? You need to escape a situation. You should always know how it works. And that probably applies to personal supply chains. That's the theory of this episode, the theme, the underlying and unifying statement. So what about the parts that don't really work so well? In describing what works, which I kind of have for our personal supply chains, I've already included the parts that do not. They are complexity. While complication describes some system that is understandable and which can be described and reproduced and whatnot, a complex system is often beyond description, beyond reproducibility. Our personal supply chains will sometimes, perhaps often, appear complex to we normal people, making our way through our days, which can be a problem if something breaks down. So I've already kind of described that. So that kind of wraps that up. Summary. But also opacity or opacity, depending on how you like to pronounce that word. This is the opposite of transparency, and it applies quite often to our personal supply chains for the more interesting items we need or want. We probably know where our water and electricity come from, as I alluded to. If you take a moment, you certainly get a water bill and electric bill. They aren't overly, nobody's saying, well, they have fees. Sometimes they have mysterious fees, but nobody's saying, well, your electricity had to make its way from, some part of Europe or whatever. That pretty much the electric grid is mildly complicated as far as sourcing and swapping capacities and so on. But and water rights are also somewhat complicated. But for the casual customer that's using these things, for our personal supply chains, okay, we don't really have to delve too deep. You could probably find out what's going on in one phone call, maybe two, though we may not know the finer details, even if you do make those calls. So the last miles, getting the things repaired when they fail and so on, hopefully those just happen like magic. We might know where our avocados come from, but it can get really difficult to find out some of the origin stories of our treasured goods, your cell phones, your computers, your car. If there are more than 2 or 3 hops, border crossings, and currency exchanges, who knows, right? And maybe you don't get to know. A strange consequential supply chain issue became apparent later in 2024, though it had been growing an issue for some time prior, regarding eggs, price of eggs, and more importantly, the price of eggs at grocery stores. So the final price paid, technically the cost of eggs, but before they get to the grocery store, but then the price of eggs paid by consumers like you and me. For some, the issue caused by a spreading bird flu in the egg-laying chicken population led to culling of, well, unfortunately, a lot of hens. Those are the chickens that lay the eggs, which reduced the egg production capacity of domestic egg farmers. That's what some people came to know and understand. For most of the egg purchasing public, though, this was simply an indication that prices were too damned high. The price of eggs is too high. Well, you see, there's this bird flu. The prices are high. Inflation is bad. Technically, inflation is not. Anyway, for another time. Here in Southern Nevada, where there are no facilities producing eggs at scale locally, that is, all of our eggs have to be trucked in, we had prices in the top 2 or 3. That is, the most expensive eggs in the United States can be found in the greater Vegas area, or the second most or third most. This was no fun. Even today, eggs are still about 3 to 4 times more expensive than their lows 2 or 3 years ago. An explanation is often a matter of hand-waving and moving on to something else. So the practical example I have for myself, I would sometimes purchase an 18 pack, a carton of eggs. Is that what it is? What is it? A tray of eggs? I don't know. 18 eggs for $1, believe it or not. Those were sometimes promotional prices, but they could be had. So 18 eggs for $1 from a Kroger property here in the Vegas area. And usually they'd be something like, for 18 eggs, large AA, like batteries, they would be maybe $2, $2.50, but you'd probably get them closer to $2. And then if they were, promotional pricing, and this would happen frequently. So, figure $1 now, those very same eggs are $3.49, $4.19, has to end with a 9. So that's not $1. Any supply, and the same could go for gasoline and any number of things. Any supply chain for oh, by the way, supply chains for gasoline, that's an entire show right there. Someday we can go over that one time when a major gasoline supply line in Tucson, Arizona was interrupted, and the fun that ensued. Anyway, any supply chain for any product we want or need, which is very complicated, with perhaps dozens, hundreds, or maybe even thousands of components and subassemblies and production steps and things moving around to different countries and across borders and so on, can be impacted by more and more factors, some of which may make the news we consume, wherever you get your news. Others are implied but have some impact, like a bird flu, but across other seemingly unrelated products. So it's not like a bird flu is impacting eggs and other things. Like maybe people weren't eating so much chicken because the chickens were killed, but not for the purposes of, did they butcher chickens? Anyway, yeah, I guess they would. But yeah, there could be problems that impact unrelated products because they all use similar components under the hood, behind the scenes, or they rely on similar transports or others. It's quite complicated, as we've hinted at. And then there are the transportation issues and other geo-possibilities for a variety of reasons that may raise the price of your coffee or reduce the general availability of your bananas. Not to mention your clothing and your mobile phones, and the list of things goes on and on. If you are listening to this in the United States somewhere, you know that much has been made of what's called reshoring, manufacturing. Manufacturing. Yeah, my voice is arguing with me. Bringing manufacturing back to domestic capacity. So most of the things we buy, because of Bretton Woods and because of pricing and the desire to chase profits and the balance of all those costs I mentioned. So if you can minimize all those costs and you end up not manufacturing, but rather shipping to our United States, then that's the way that is. So then you have to worry about what these other factors might be that have impact on availability and prices and so on. And they're more like pretty much everything, right? Like probably, people can throw around numbers. I couldn't even tell you something that I use daily that's produced in the United States completely without. And remember, even if it's made in the United States, it may depend on parts or subassemblies that are not made in the United States. And I think some hay was made of this regarding cars. Even if a car is built in the United States, it has parts that are built somewhere else. So all these things aggregate. So what then? Oh, let us begin. So what do we do about this? By the way, we're not going to fix or solve anything in this episode, but like I said, we're going to, start a conversation with myself initially. So let us begin with the two specific things I mentioned. Complexity is something that we can address, that can be addressed by explaining general supply chains on a rolling basis. That is, updating the descriptions as they get more complicated or simpler. If and when the chains change, just say that 5 times fast. When they twist, when they break. The bananas and avocados are not available because of this, right? A storm, a virus. Plants can get viruses. There's any number of things, right? So if the chain is known or understood or can be observed or described beforehand, if there's some impact, you say, oh, this is why. You point to the part of the chain or the pathway that can be described in general, and you make it complicated rather than complex. So to the casual consumer, oh, okay, I see what's going on there. Just make that information available. The information is generally available, at least grossly. Most have some idea where finished electronics and other consumer goodies like these come from. Edit that. These consumer electronics and rubber doodads and silicone, this and that, and a variety of products. Toys are famously from Asia. There's a whole toy city in Guangdong somewhere. I worked at a toy company. More information about what they depend on and how fluctuations in currency exchange rates and other factors that I already mentioned impact any particular class of products or regions that are either producing or through which they might pass, or where they are arriving, and so on. If there's a storm, if there's a tsunami and it impacts the Long Beach piers, shipping receiving center, where the ships come in and the containers are taken off the ships and whatnot. So there's one in Long Beach. There are a few, but if that one becomes inaccessible or becomes overloaded, if there's a strike, there's all sorts of factors that can slow down even the final steps of imports. All being more transparent, we'll get to transparency in a second, but having a greater understanding in general of these flows and the different factors, these would all go a long way to make how our personal supply chains function and why we experience what we do when they do not function. And it would all be a bit more clear. There would be no surprises or confusion. I have my rose-colored glasses on right now, so I'm feeling optimistic. Opacity can flip to transparency. That would be nice. This would not be a simple matter at all, as many specific products and their detailed supply chains are a matter of negotiated prices and other deals that may be played out close to the vest, as the expression goes. So complete transparency is unlikely. It would be nice, but probably not. However, if there are price increases or availability decreases that become a cause for concern, transparency to some degree becomes something we as consumers might well be entitled to. We can demand it. We should. Doesn't mean we're going to get it, but we should demand it. Some of the challenges with implementing something like this play out in the headlines of today as I record this with regard to import taxes and their impact on global trade, which has impact on supply chains and what makes it to which port for how much, or how much more, I should say, and making that transparent so that you understand that I'm paying the same price as I was 6 months ago, but then there's some additional fees. We get to see those fees on things like phone bills, electric bills, utility bills in general. So making that transparent to the consumer would go a long way in making how the personal supply chains work that much easier to understand and easier to keep track of. Doesn't mean people would, but some transparency and some visibility into the complexity so that there's just an elevated general understanding so that it's not some mystery. I don't know how electricity reaches my home. I know that the lights come on when I flip the switch. That's all I care about. So a little bit more awareness than that would go a long way. And so making that information available to make that awareness more likely would be nice. These are ideas for bringing the legacy of global supply chains into the modern era. We should just have a better understanding and more visibility into these things from a consumer perspective. So again, there are people that are paid to keep track of these things. That's a different thing. Business supply chains, very different. The data is there. It is a matter of sharing it, or more likely not sharing it. With the advent of AI tools, yay, it could be possible to capture pricing and availability data. This could be crowdsourced even, which you'll find this in applications like Gas Buddy, I think it is, where you can try to find the best gasoline price retail at a gas station near you, and people update the prices based on what they're finding. And so it's a kind of a group effort to locate best prices. And that's called a perfect information, when you have access to all pricing for products that you need in an availability region. So if you can provide perfect information regarding items in your personal supply chain, then you can try to account for fluctuations and understand better where those fluctuations are coming from, why they're happening, and what might come of the near term and longer term fluctuations as they might impact your budgets and ability to purchase or use these things. So these AI tools can be used to correlate price changes with various events in the world. This is not a generative AI application per se, there might be some chatting with the resources, but rather a capture of market data like price and price changes correlated with location of where the gas stations are in different places, the different grocery stores have different prices, different chains, different product types, different brands, whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, the list goes on and on. There are product classes, brands, and other variations, and implied supply chain information, not to mention those other factors like currency exchange and weather and all the rest of the things. So all of these could be used to build and maintain a model of how our personal supply chains function or dysfunction, as the case may be. And this would be a fascinating experiment and would also represent a practical application of modern AI to accomplish a real goal that does not take away jobs, not directly anyway. You would basically, by using artificial intelligence to develop a perfect information model of your personal supply chains and their economics, you would have more visibility into what you're paying for and why prices change, and correlate it against a variety of events, and you could maybe even come up with a prediction model. That would be nice, which actually delivers practical value to consumers like you and me. That would be a nice change of pace. Like, hey, favorite chat client tool, draw me a picture of remember the astronaut on the horse? Hey, try to figure out how I can get the best prices for things over the next 6 months, given the state of affairs. And by the way, keep me updated. Agentic AI tool. Keep an eye on global exchange rates and geopolitical strife. Tell me how to get the best price on my avocados and bananas. It would be a fascinating experiment, and maybe it's a startup idea. Add to the mix, and something that we can include in ongoing episodes around this topic, application and data supply chains. I already mentioned software supply chains. When we build software, when we make those applications that everybody loves so much, we often depend on the work of others as components, sub-assemblies that we include in our own projects. And these could be anything from compilers to libraries to example code. It could be a whole bunch of stuff, and you don't even have to know. You don't have to know what those are. These are just parts that come together to form the whole. They could have risks associated with them. Do you really know where that stuff's coming from? The cloud has been around for a while, as we know. We've all been using the internet for a good long time. Some of us longer than others. Where our data is, who knows? Where it's stored, how it gets stolen, who can look at it, where it gets merged together to classify each and every one of us for profit, so on and so on, is another area where consumer-side tools that take advantage of modern technologies could go a long way to making it a bit more clear how these virtual supply chains also impact us, and especially when they change. As I'm speaking right now, there's a TikTok arrangement that's making news. TikTok operating in the United States will have some sort of, I don't know if it's a controlling interest or ownership outright or some sort of a partnership or whatever the finer details are. What happens to the TikTok data? There was a lot of concern that, it's being, data about Americans is being sent to another country. Well, does this change that? Etc. So being more familiar with the supply chains for the things that we use, whether it's software, whether it's data, whether it's applications in the cloud somewhere or on our phones, etc. These are all just variations on the same theme. Very often we have no idea. So this is a nice way to gently broach this topic. Supply chains are all around us. They impact each of us in positive and negative ways. And this is unlikely to change anytime soon. So supply chains are here to stay. They may be reorienting themselves or becoming more tangled or less clear, with buying habits, locations, transactions, and more all floating around at all times. Maybe our personal supply chains could use some examination and evaluation from our perspective, that is, from the consumer side, and with consumers as the primary actor. Like, we'll tell you nothing and you'll like it. That's not great. So individual consumers at least taking more well, responsibility would be nice, but having greater understanding of our personal supply chains is a good start. And from there, we can maybe try to make things a little bit better for ourselves individually and as a collective bargaining population, maybe, and see where that leads us. So who knows? This is the beginning of an ongoing collection of episodes, not in order. This is not like part one of a 20-part series or anything, but every once in a while I'll try to broach a particular topic that I might have some insights into. And then at some point, maybe we'll have other people join in on this conversation. It is a fascinating area to at least find out about and to become more aware of. And if modernity will bring us more awareness, more visibility, more ability to not only observe, but maybe even take control of or exert some influence over these things as consumers, as individuals, and as populations, so much the better? Question mark. So, to be continued. And that, I've made it before 12:30 in the morning. Not bad. 44 minutes total time on my clock. So that'll bring it down closer to 40 minutes when I do the final silence truncation. Maybe 41 minutes. That's just a guess. Who knows? But thanks for listening. And hopefully this was interesting for you. It's interesting for me to think about. I like thinking about systems and this kind of stuff in general. So yeah, we'll see if we can make this into a thing that we revisit from time to time or even frequently. And now I'm going to go rest my voice. Thanks for listening as always. We'll catch you next time. Yikes.